I don't really like it too much, but critically it is just it's just it's just how do I describe this? It's phenomenal. It is the it's one of the best films I've seen outside of Hollywood. It is just goodness sakes. And that's really surprising that a film that I don't like is also one of the best I've ever seen. But anyway, let's move on to number 11 then. Or number 12. Yeah, number 12. At number 12 is Stanley Kubrick's greatest movie, 2001, A Space Odyssey. Yep, what can I say? One of the greatest sci fi movies of all time, one of the most influential, one of the most timeless sci fi movies of all time. What can I say? It is very ambiguous by the end, but honestly, that's probably one of the best aspects of it. It has so many great iconic scenes. Its villain, which is just an AI, manages to be so terrifying despite not being like an alien or a human or anything. It's like it's impressive for a film made back in the 60s. The visuals look like it was pulled straight out of the modern day, even though they didn't have CGI back then. It's 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's you can't really understand the film. Again, this is yet another film that it's not really among my favorites, but it's one of the best I've seen. So yeah, it's 2001: A Space Odyssey. What can I say? Let's move on then, shall we? At number 11 is The Dark Knight, the film that is almost unanimously considered the greatest superhero movie of all time, and Christopher Nolan's crown jewel of his career. What can I say? It is fantastic. Christian Bale's great as Batman, even though his voice isn't the best, probably the only problem with the film. And Heath Ledger's Joker is a standout. The best movie villain of the century, maybe even of all time, who knows? And what can I say about the film that hasn't been said? People have praised this film to no end for how it doesn't fall victim to certain modern day superhero movie tropes. It's different. It manages to be unique. It is the best superhero movie of all time. It is like Batman, it is dark. It is realistic. It is gritty. It is fantastic. The best superhero movie of all time, and it's not even close. Let's get into the top 10 finally, shall we? From the greatest superhero movie of all time to the greatest horror movie of all time, we have Psycho, one of the most influential and iconic horror movies of all time. It was originally not really well critically received, but today, people are praising it to no end because Alfred Hitchcock, despite being not really the best guy IRL, manages to direct managed to put together what might just be the perfect horror movie. Like, it doesn't have any demons or monsters, but rather a insane individual, a psycho. That's where it gets its name, of course. And the twist, like, I won't reveal it if you haven't seen it, though it's pretty iconic, so iconic now that you've probably heard of it. Even if you do know it, though, it doesn't lessen the impact because this film is just so masterfully crafted. The suspense is fantastic. The cinematography, everything is fantastic. It's Psycho. What can I say? Let's move on to number 9. At number 9 is a no-brainer. It's Empire Strikes Back. Easily the best Star Wars movie. One of the most iconic movies of all time. Right alongside the rest of the trilogy, but what this film did is it deviated itself from the original, which was a fun and sometimes lighthearted space adventure, and manages to be dark and have a more mature story. And that story is so masterfully crafted. You'd think that a film about a bunch of space, like you'd think a sci-fi movie like Star Wars wouldn't be so serious or anything from the first film. Then you watch the second film. It's phenomenal. It's Empire Strikes Back. I don't think I can say anything else. Everyone said everything great about this film. It is one of the greatest movie sequels of all time. That twist, I am your father, you've heard it before. I'm not even spoiling because everyone knows it by this point. One of the best movies of all time. You already know that, anyways. Let's move on to number 8, I believe, shall we? Okay, before we get to number 8, and I just need to do a quick fix here. I accidentally switched up Stalker and this film for number 13, I believe. Yeah, number 13. So I accidentally switched up those two films. Stalker's actually at number 31 on my top 100, but Goodfellas accidentally got switched. But yeah, let's talk about this one quick. It's Goodfellas. It's Robert De Niro. It's his masterpiece. It's one of the best gangster movies of all time. Like, one of the best since The Godfather. It's one of the best of the 90s. I can't really blabber on too quick, but yeah, this is number 13. I just had to switch that up quick. I made a mistake. But yeah, let's move on then, shall we? To number 8 then. Yep. At number 8 is Citizen or no, number Oh, sorry, wrong movie. Sorry about that. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna change that up quick. Sorry, I made a few mistakes. At number 8 is Pulp Fiction. It's 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 Pulp Fiction. It's Quentin Tarantino's most iconic movie. It's brutal, it's gritty, it's quotable, it's iconic. One of the best films of the 90s and of all time. Again, I don't really need a blabber on. You know this film's great. It's brutal. It's a crime movie. It's a unique crime movie and it manages to be unique. It's fantastic. I keep on using the same words for each of them. I don't really have too much time to do a deep dive quite yet, but I'll be able to do their own videos for each movie. On to number 7. Okay, at number 7 is Citizen Kane. Probably it alongside The Godfather is probably the most common movie placed at the top of the best film of all time lists. So you're probably wondering, why isn't it at number 1? Well, it's still pretty high on the list, so you know it's fantastic, and all the great things people have said about this film are true. It's fantastic, it's influential, it changed cinema forever. Like, it was a great debut for Orson Welles, and like, not too many directors managed to debut with one of the greatest films of all time, but Orson Welles was able to do that and established himself as one of the greatest directors of all time. And you probably know why this one's great. It tells its story mostly through flashbacks. It's engaging to see the development of Citizen Kane himself. Rosebud is one of the most iconic movie quotes of all time. It's one of the most iconic movies of all time. Like, it's Citizen Kane. What else can I say? But there are 6 more movies that I actually found critically to be a bit better than this one. And let's get on to number 6 then, shall we? At number 6 is Casablanca. Yes, Casablanca is actually a smidge better than Citizen Kane. Why is that? Well, what can I say? It's iconic. It manages to be. It's a cold movie. It's iconic. The lines are iconic. The characters are iconic. The romance is iconic. This film is iconic. It's Casablanca, one of the best classic Hollywood movies, and probably the best black and white movie pre Schindler's List, which we will get to later. You know that one's gonna be on this list. And it manages to if I were to give you one movie, if I were to give you one movie that best sums up the style, the vibes, and the art of filmmaking back in the 30s and 40s, I'd show you this one. Because this is a film that everyone should experience, regardless of if you like it or not. No one can deny that. Even if you don't like this, it's not really one of my favorites, but critically, it is among some of the greatest of all time. I totally understand why this is ranked so high on so many people's list, and you shouldn't be surprised that it's so high on this one, because critically, it's one of the greatest of all time. Let's move on to the top 5 finally, shall we? At number 5, starting off our top 5, is a no-brainer, Shawshank Redemption. It is the highest rated movie of all time on IMDb, and for good reason. Fantastic story about redemption. The main character is great, though Morgan Freeman's Red is also a standout. Their friendship is fun to watch grow, and its ending is so satisfying and joyous. It's realistic, it's dark at times, but at the same time there's hope. And that genius escape plan that Andy Dufresne creates over the film is fantastic. What can I say? It is one of the best movies of the 90s, and we'll get to the number one best, which is pretty obvious. I've mentioned it a few times in this list, but Shawshank Redemption is nonetheless a masterpiece of a film. I love it. You should see it. And if you're not seeing it, you're committing cardinal sin. Let's move on to number 4. At number 4 is The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, the best movie of the 21st century, and it's not even close. What do I say about this film? It has so many iconic scenes, lines, characters. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is unanimously considered the greatest trilogy of all time, and this is its crowning jewel. If the first two films weren't already great, but this one is a standout. The story, it divides its time between two stories. The story of Aragorn and the rest of the Fellowship protecting Minas Tirith, and Frodo and Sam heading to Mount Doom to put an end to Sauron. And man, is this an epic tale. This is probably the most epic movie on this list by far. Well, either this one or our number one spot. We'll get to that one later. It's my favorite movie of all time. I did say this isn't influenced by personal opinions, but it isn't. But that just goes to show how great this movie is, because even without personal opinions, this is still one of the greatest movies of all time. What else do I even need to say? It's Return of the King. What do I need to say? It's phenomenal. It's emotional. This is one of only 2 films that have made me cry. It didn't make me cry because because of the characters. It made me cry because it's so great and I didn't want it to end. Even though the film's 4 hours and 10 minutes long, the extended edition specifically, I didn't want it to end. I want this film to go on forever. But like all things in life, it eventually has to come to an end. Like life itself, and Return of the King will endure for ages, because as time goes on, I'm sure this film will never be forgotten. It's Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. If I was ranking this as my favorite movies of all time, this would be right at the top. It's my favorite movie of all time and my second favorite piece of media of all time. I'll reveal my favorite piece of media if we can hit 1,000 subscribers, let's say. But let's move on to the top 3 movies of all time. Number 3 is Schindler's List. Now, on the topic of movies that have made me cry, this is the only one that has made me cry for the characters. This film is masterful. It is phenomenal. I didn't know Spielberg had a film like this in him. This film is unflinching. It does not sugarcoat anything. It does not censor anything. It shows you the full brutality of the Holocaust era. And for that, it is a masterpiece, because no one is safe in this film. Even kids. It shows kids being shot. It shows brutality never seen on screen at the time. Well, I guess there was still brutal films from the 80s, but this is one of the saddest movies ever made. Like, I don't think there was really any R-rated films Spielberg directed at the time. And then all of a sudden he came out with this one after Jurassic Park, which is a movie about dinosaurs. And then he directs one of the darkest and saddest and most masterful movies of all time. It is his greatest movie of all time. That's not even an argument. It is a fact that this is his greatest film of all time and one of the greatest movies of all time. You shouldn't even argue against that. It is powerful, masterful. It's Schindler's List. I cried myself to sleep after watching it. Let's move on to number 2. Okay, number 2 may seem a bit like a cheat, but hear me out. You cannot separate these 2 films, and I don't care what you say, but at number 2 we have The Godfather Part 1 and 2. Now, if I had to absolutely choose one of these to put at number 2, then Godfather Part 2, Part 1 would be at number 3. The Godfather is the most common film found at the top of best movie of all time lists. Now, critically, I actually found that Part 2 is actually a smidge better with an even grander story, grander scope, even bigger score. And the main thing that I think puts Godfather Part 2 above the first one is how it acts as both a prequel and a sequel. Like, acts as 2 movies at the same time, and yet does it so well. And both stories are fantastic. Now, if I say Godfather Part 2 is actually critically better than the first one, why do I have them both together? because you just can't separate these two films. Part 1 is one of the most influential, impactful, and iconic movies of all time, with so many iconic scenes, actors, characters. You never forget Vito Corleone. You cannot separate these two films. So I don't care what you say, but I'm putting them both together. They're both just as important and just as significant. If you had to choose one, if I was forced to, I would have part 2 at number 2, and I would just bump part 1 down to number 3. But anyways, for number 2, it's Godfather Part 2. I have them both put together, but really, in reality, Part 2 is number 2 on this list, because Part 2 is phenomenal. Part 1 is iconic. It is masterful. It's a 10 out of 10. Both are 10 out of 10 films. But Part 2 I found was a smidge better, because it doesn't really improve. It's a lot of the stuff in Part 2 is either just as good or even greater. And what can I say? Part 2, like these movies live up to everything people have been saying. They are some of the greatest movies of all time. They would have been number 1, like, again, if this was a top, if I had to include both of these, but in separate slots, then Part 1 would be number 3, Part 2 would be number 2, and this would be like a top 31, with Singing in the Rain just bumped down to 31. But that's beyond the point. I have them both together because they're both just as significant, just as important. Both, I'd say they're both equally great, but I feel Part 2 is just a smidge better if I had to choose one of them. Though I personally like Part 1 better, Part 2 is the clear standout of the bunch. Like Part 1, it's a standout. Fantastic. Like, it deserves all the praise, but Part 2, man, how do I explain this? They're both really close on the same. They're both about the same level of quality, but Part 2 has that prequel and sequel structure going for it, so that's what puts it above it. Puts it above it. No, that's what puts it above Part 1 for from a critical point of view. But enough blabbering, let's move on to the greatest movie of all time. I won't have too long to talk about it. I think I'll have to make my own video on it. But let's move on to number 1. Where do I begin with this movie? Number 1, greatest movie of all time, objectively, critically, not subjective at all. Because this isn't even one of my favorite movies of all time, but man, is it the best I've seen out of all of them. It has everything great about movies, everything great about movies. Cinematography, acting, plot, epic, like, directing, everything great about filmmaking is present here. It has a fantastic score, characters, cinematography. It's absurd how great this movie is. I never knew movies could be this good. I won't blabber on any further because, honestly, this film deserves its own video, and I have talked about it in the past, but it deserves its own, half an hour video where I just gush about how fantastic this film is as a whole, because it's Lawrence of Arabia. It's the most epic movie ever made. It looks like $1 billion, and I can't believe this film is already decades old, because, wow. This is the pinnacle of filmmaking, the pinnacle of art as a whole, and overall, the greatest movie ever made, without a doubt. Thank you for watching this list. Make sure to like and subscribe for more lists, and we will see you in the next one. Thank you very much.